we have a panel here to talk about what all of these entrepreneurs want to know about. And that is, how are you going to help me be successful in this urban entrepreneurship journey? And we couldn't have a better moderator for this panel than Leslie Smith, the president and CEO of TechTown Detroit. So I'm not going to spend any time here, waste time. I'm going to introduce Leslie, and she can introduce her panel, and we'll get going.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's always hard to get everyone back into the room once you set them free, so I'm grateful that you came back. We do, in fact, have a fabulous panel when it comes to talking about how we're going to really come together to support urban entrepreneurs. We have a lawyer that's doing that, a funder that's doing that, two urban entrepreneurs to talk about what we're doing and what we're not doing. In fact, one of them asked me out in the lobby, how honest do you want me to be? And I said, as honest as you can, girl. So we're going to have a real candid conversation about what's needed to bring solutions to the most pervasive problems we're facing in our inner cities. And these folks are going to help us do that. I'm here simply to help move them through it. So without further ado, I will ask them to each introduce themselves. We'll move through a series of conversation starter questions that I have prepared, but we'll also encourage all of you to engage in the conversation as well. So with that, Tiffany, you want to start? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello? All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Sadek. I am a Texan by birth, Detroiter by choice, as of a couple of years ago. I have been a corporate lawyer pretty much my whole career until I moved to Detroit, and I saw a real need to have these kind of services specifically for entrepreneurs and startups because they have unique needs. So I left about a year ago to have my own startup, which is a law firm that specifically works with the crowd here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stella Safari. Originally from the Congo. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I just graduated from Dartmouth College about a year ago in 2013. And I came to Detroit through Venture for America, which is a fellowship program that connects recent graduates to startup communities around, basically just around the country, mostly in communities that are very much trying to revitalize their economy. And also I work at Invest Detroit. I manage our First Step Fund, and that is our early stage fund that supports entrepreneurs all throughout Southeast Michigan, but with a special focus on Detroit and minority and women entrepreneurs. In addition to that, I'm also wearing another hat today, and I represent Startup Effect. And that is an organization that I run, and it is a youth entrepreneurship program. So we partner with schools and educators to bring entrepreneurial training to middle school and high schoolers.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Yvette Jenkins, and I'm a native Detroiter, and I tell you, I'm restraining myself from standing up. I've participated in a number of entrepreneurial classes and workshops, doing pitches, and, what the first thing you have to do is stand up. So it's sitting is challenging for me. Anyway, I'm wearing two hats today. One is as the owner of Love Travels Imports. We explore the world and your neighborhood for the uniquely you. Of fair trade, handmade accessories. I like to say that we work with artisans from Madagascar to Mount Clemens, Michigan. The second hat that I'm wearing is as the manager of the Grand River Workplace, which is a new business incubator co-working space, which is opening up in the historical Grandmont Rosedale neighborhood. And we are, the intent of it is for business startups, independent workers, so that you can develop a community. I personally think that Grandmont Rosedale is one of the great places in Detroit, not because I live there, but because within 20 to 15 minutes, you can be anywhere in the metro area from that location or to that location, which I think is really pretty cool, particularly when you're in business. So, thank you.
My name is Jamie Shea. I'm the managing director of investments at Mission Throttle. My background is that I'm a native of New York City, actually, and came to Michigan for grad school. I came here, started in 2009, did a joint degree right here, go blue, at the business school and the School of Natural Resources and Environment. Had absolutely no intention whatsoever of sticking around. Was looking at going out to San Francisco to the Bay Area to do early stage investing. Started going into Detroit, fell in love with the city, and by the sort of third year I said I'm staying no matter what. And was very lucky to wind up meeting a gentleman named Philip Fisher, who is on the board of the Max and Marjorie Fisher Foundation. And we got talking, and I was actually trying to raise money for him for the social venture fund here at Ross. Walked out with no money for Ross, but walked out with a job and a partner. And so for the last 2.5 years, we've been, along with our partner Susan Gordon, and with the help of the foundation, Maria DiLorenzo, as well as our director of communications, building out an impact investing group focused on, just so to be specific about it, we make investments into both for-profits and into for-impact organizations. I've taken a pledge not to use the term nonprofit, and so we use the term for-impact. Whose primary product or service directly addresses a key social and/or environmental issue in Michigan. That can look at things around health, education, environment, basic needs. We use multiple forms of investments, so we can do equity, we'll do debt, and we do those at market rate and below market rate, always being very conscious of what the social outcome is that the entrepreneurs are trying to achieve and how we measure the achievement of that. We also have an advisory practice that works with social enterprises, primarily ones that are actually probably a little bit more established, a lot of them for impact organizations that are thinking about how they can drive greater earned revenue streams to help them be more financially sustainable so that they can focus on their mission. And that's it. We also give some small grants as well to help build the impact investing and social enterprise ecosystem here in Michigan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Clearly, we have the right folks in the room, right? So thank you all for those introductions. Jamie, I'm grateful for all of the language you used because it really brings out the first question and topic I think we need to talk about, which there are a lot of conversations about social innovation, urban entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, impact investing, impact work, mission work, charitable purpose work, and David and I have spent a lot of time talking about what all of that means and how confusing it is for the market. And we also spend time talking about the permission to make money while solving the problems that face us. And so a lot of the things you talk about, I think, start to that conversation. And I'd like the panel to just talk a little bit about the criticality of urban entrepreneurship in so describing businesses being created around solving the problems of the urban environment. And so if you could each sort of spend a couple minutes or a minute or two talking about that, I'd appreciate it.
I guess I'm happy to dive in, and I'm actually really grateful for the term urban entrepreneurship. And when we describe what we do, and we say we're an impact investing group, and we come up with our own thesis, right? Our screen is say what's in and what's not. When someone comes to us and they say, "Look, I'm opening up a restaurant in Detroit," is that for us? Is that an impact investment or not? And that's a really tough question, right? And so at least on our side, but I think it's for our side, we try to pick up that organization and we take it outside of the city of Detroit. And we say, let's drop that organization in San Francisco or New York. How social would that be? What's sort of the population that they're focused on serving? Is it a population which is at risk, or is it serving a more traditional population? But and the reason we do that is because when we were looking at where the gaps were in the system, that was one of them. And so we looked because we felt as though there were economic development dollars that were specifically focused on, building more traditional businesses that were necessary in the city, that were focused on job creation, all of which is incredibly, incredibly important. So we said, okay, our niche is actually going to be more focused on really specifically saying, okay, does the primary product or service directly address a key social and or environmental issue? And so it's not that it's tangential, it's not that you create jobs through it, but literally you might be having a program which is an education program designed at serving sort of a youth group that might not have had the particular advantages of another population. So that's for us. We get very specific, but it's really important, I think, to be able to identify that there is another group of entrepreneurs doing something very unique in Detroit that might be serving a more traditional product, but that their challenges are unique compared to the challenges that that same person might face in San Francisco or New York or other places. And so it's really important. I find it gets a little nuanced, but identifying what each of these different segments are is very important because they all need different resources and there are different people to go to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And so the better that we can identify it, the better that we can help them.
I think that's a great point. So I'd love to hear from Yvette and Stella, the startup entrepreneurs on the panel, about how well we're doing or not doing at identifying those resources.
Before I go to that question, I'd like to talk a little bit about impact and why I made the decision to go in the business that I did. I'm an early adopter of fair trade in this particular area, but a stat that people aren't commonly aware of is that artisan wares in that industry is second globally to agriculture. That's a lot of people. That's thousands and thousands of people that are working in that particular industry and having impact. For example, one of the groups that I work with, 2,500 people are employed. Their children are able to go to private schools. That's huge. And having the ability to be able to employ local artisans in an area that's not traditionally seen as something in our area, I think has been pretty important as well. And so to know that I have assisted them being able to support themselves or make, inroads into supporting themselves is pretty important. In terms of support mechanisms, I have found it really valuable to participate in all the different, or a variety of different opportunities that I've had here locally. I was part of the first group that went through the Activate program, and that was an excellent opportunity because it helped create community. And I think that is probably one of the most important things you get out of all these different things you participate in. I was also part of the retail boot camp at TechTown. And again, it was another opportunity for community, to also have mentors, to have people as you go through this process, because that's what it is. It's a journey. You start out, you're not exactly sure about what you need, but as you go through the process, you identify those things that are, oh my gosh, I need help in terms of legal. I need help in terms of, real estate. I need help in understanding these contracts, et cetera. So these support mechanisms, I think, are very important. And I'm so thankful that I'm in Detroit now as an entrepreneur because these support mechanisms are there. And I would, highly recommend get involved, jump in there, meet people, become part of that community.
I think one comment I'd like to make, I think often, we think that, social entrepreneurship or urban entrepreneurship or innovation has to be tied or untied to technology or community. And I think it's really important to recognize that they're all interwoven. In fact, Yvette, I heard you, when you were introducing yourself to David, say something like, I just have a lifestyle business in Grandmont Rosedale. And I sort of cringed a little bit because you don't just have a lifestyle business in Grandmont Rosedale, you're creating community in your neighborhood where community didn't exist. And so we're forced in the city of Detroit to innovate in every area of thinking and activity. And we're all doing that in our own unique ways. I think we're trying to call into question how we're doing that and can we do it more effectively and efficiently because the need is urgent. And I always say we can't say we're in a crisis and not act with urgency, right? So all of this is about organizing ourselves around an urgent response to all of the opportunities. So Jamie, the fact that as a funder you are willing to sort of see things differently answers that question, right? There isn't enough food or restaurants available in this community, and so how do we think about that differently? So I think we're urged to consider urban entrepreneurship as all of these aspects. Loveland was on a panel earlier and a real heavy technology play around dealing with, all of these unknown parcels of land. That's a real heavy and obvious sort of technology opportunity. But what you're doing and advancing, artisan activities in a community where that's new, that's innovation. I mean, that's a new and novel activity here. And so don't ever apologize for that again, please.
Thank you.
I would just add to add to the point that Leslie made is it's actually really exciting, and is that if you went to San Francisco or you went to New York and you had a conference about entrepreneurship, you know, the odds if it's in Silicon Valley, you're going to have all technology, fast growth companies, and it's going to look very similar, and that's going to be its own group. If, you know, in New York, it would be fintech and some other things. In Detroit, it's all the same. It's really interesting. So Loveland's a great example. I know those guys well. Was Michael in the room still? Yeah. So everyone sees, I think, you know, I think people self-identify as an entrepreneur, and in Detroit, or maybe as Detroit before they identify as a high-growth entrepreneur or a lifestyle. They just say, hey, I'm in Detroit, and I'm an entrepreneur. And it's a really great time, I think, because people see it so cohesively.
And I'll just add one more thing to that. I really appreciate what both of you have said. And so with Startup Effect, we kind of approach the problem from a different angle, more from a long-term angle. So growing up, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I've always been so excited about technology. But then every time I would go to these, you know, conferences or meetings, I wouldn't see people who look like me, you know, either female or black, whatever. I just would not see people who look like me. And I thought that was a problem, you know, and I would always push myself to be that person, to be at the table, to be part of that conversation. But not everyone has that privilege to even know that these things are happening. And so with Startup Effect, what we're trying to do is really capture that curiosity from a very young age and take advantage of it. I think that as much as, you know, I like to be inclusive of all the different types of businesses, I think that there's great opportunity in the tech industry, and there is a segment of people that's just not at the table. And I think that's a big problem. And so part of that problem, I feel, is exposure. A lot of us just don't know what tech looks like. Like, what does it even mean to have a tech company? Do you have to be a techie to found a tech company? Not necessarily. So just bridging those gaps of what it even takes to start a tech business, and how you can turn your passion for something that is socially focused, that is community focused, into something that is, you know, that incorporates tech in it, I think is also important. And it's important to do that from a really young age, and get these students involved, get them excited about this, so that when they start going to college or you know, doing their first entrepreneurial ventures, this is something that will be at the forefront of what they're thinking.
I think, Stella, I think that's such a great point. And I think there are a lot of emerging activities in that space. So I know Tan's here, but Kidpreneur, who's training kids to code when they're, you know, 6, I think. My 8-year-old went through his class this summer and built a Minecraft server. But, you know, I don't even know how to play Minecraft the game, but she's building servers. So, you know, I think that's really important. Keith from Ecotech, who's been doing this for 10 years, trying to take kids into the lab and have them, you know, work on sort of bench experiments. 3 companies commercializing out of his lab on the 5th floor at Techtown by high school kids. And so I do think that's important. But I also think we have an additional opportunity, and I urge you guys to sort of think about this and talk about this. Are we identifying the opportunities for the would-be sort of technologists or technology startup entrepreneurs for them to solve, right? So David and I have talked a lot about there are a lot of issues that need addressing and big thinking, and we're still focused on this sort of push of technologies that may or may not necessarily be relevant to the most urgent issues of the day. Is there a way that we, as a network or an ecosystem, can bring to bear some of those issues and call out and request solutions for those? And if so, how do we organize around that?
I think being a newer Detroiter and learning the culture in the area, one of the things that struck me as so fascinating, and one of the things I'm very proud to tell people back home, is the self-reliance and resiliency I see in the Detroit and surrounding culture, where in the city we have not had a lot of things. We haven't had a lot of services, and people have figured out no one's going to come bring this to us. We need to figure out how to do this. And so you've seen a lot of interesting types of entrepreneurship pop up. like Sit On It Detroit, you know, the nonprofit that builds bus benches, because DDOT can't go out there and put out bus benches. You know, we had the worst winter that people telling me it's the worst one it's ever had, and it's not going to happen again. So, you know, the Texan in me was dying. So the worst, the worst winter, you know, Michigan has ever had, and it's freezing, and people already have to wait 45 minutes for a bus. That's bad enough, but there's no place to sit down. So two Wayne State grads were like, why don't we go out there and just build benches? And, you know, actually, why don't we put some bookshelves in there and put a little cover on there so people can actually have something to read and look at while they're waiting. So you see I'm not sure that you actually need to, push people to find these solutions. I think they're out there actually doing it. We need to make it easier for them to start the businesses and to support themselves through the businesses that they're already really starting out there.
So that's a great point. How do we make it easier?
Well, how much time do we have?
We have 14 minutes.
We're going to solve all the problems.
Well, recently I had the opportunity. There's an event that occurs on a monthly basis called Creative Mornings. And one creative morning, they were talking about maker spaces. And there are a couple of different locations through the city of Detroit where they bring children in and just show them or teach them or get them to kind of critically think about things and create things in these maker spaces. Close to Wayne State, there's a location. There's another location over on the east side. And so I think they're doing exactly what you talked about, getting these young people to think. And in fact, they talked about a young person who taught himself how to create a battery for a cell phone, a portable battery for a cell phone. And this kid was somewhere between 9 and 12. And he was their most experienced person in the makerspace and was teaching. You know, he had set up a little business teaching this. So I think, to your point, because it didn't exist, people created these kinds of things and they engaged the youth so that it could happen, you know, to provide an alternative to, you know, perhaps a sports career.
You mentioned that he started teaching other people what he learned. That's one thing I've noticed too about Detroit. Right now, we need a critical mass of a lot of things. And I see businesses not even competing with each other, even when they're in the same space, but instead trying to collaborate and help each other. And I find that so interesting. And I think that's one of the most important parts, because starting a business is hard. You know, everyone in the previous panel talked about the emotional toll it takes on you. And the entrepreneur community to lean on and get some feedback and learn from each other is such an important part. I mean, on top of the legal and the business plan and the funding, you know, you're going to fail when you start a business. You're going to have these little mini failures, and, you know, your confidence gets shaken and you're not sure if it's something you've never done before. You need that entrepreneurial community, and you need to not reinvent the wheel, and you need that mentorship. And a lot of the organizations that I see and that I work with, that's what they provide. And I think that is one of the most critical things that I've seen entrepreneurs really need.
And to your earlier point, I think resilience is so important. A program that I've been involved with is Revolve Detroit. And about 2 years ago, I put in a proposal when they were doing one of their first projects over on Agnes Street. And they selected 4 different businesses for that. These businesses, 2 of them just had their grand opening. This is 2 years after they were selected. Part of the challenges, we've got a lot of older real estate and buildings in the city. That's just a fact. Some of which aren't at code. There are challenges. So if you're thinking of, in fact, last night I had a conversation with a woman that wants to start a business, a textile business, an incubator within the city. And part of what I shared with her was, well, these buildings, they're a challenge. And so, you know, part of it, I think, is you've got to find a good space, and maybe that means buying the space. Because an unfortunate reality, too, some of the landlords that own property, they have not maintained them. They're not ADA compliant. These are all challenges. And so, you know, perhaps it means owning the building, you know, or finding an organization that perhaps buys a building and houses entrepreneurs. I'm just saying. You know, so that you can have a place to grow. Because frankly, as a small business startup, I just recently heard a stat that blew my mind. Detroit is like 4th in the nation in terms of businesses starting up. They're 50th as it relates to the amount of revenue that people make. The average revenue is like $19,000. I'll say that again, the average revenue is $19,000. How can you bring on employees if you can't earn enough to take care of yourself? So one of the things in my mind that would be helpful, going back to wear my co-working space hat, that if you're in a space like that has multiple resources available to you, perhaps you can't afford to bring a legal person on full time, but perhaps several of you that are located in this space can retain legal service, and all of you can keep a person busy. So, developing community, working together, those are all strategies, I think, to ultimately achieving your goal, which is to be profitable. Because I know that's what I want to do. Be profitable, employ people, make an impact on the community.
So thank you. That's another thing that I think it's important to highlight. It's okay if we're making money while we're doing this. I sometimes think that when you say social entrepreneurship or urban entrepreneurship, people tend to think that means you create a business for a charitable purpose. And while there may be an impact orientation, Jamie very clearly talked like an investor at the beginning. He talked about profitability and sustainability and revenue generation. And I think we have to more orient ourselves in those conversations. That $19,000 a year number is real troubling, guys. So when we first moved into our first SWAT neighborhood, Brightmoor, 3.5 years ago, and became aware of the size of the revenues and the challenges with growing an economic base in conditions like that, we knew the problem was bigger than we had expected. So I think we have to think about that. This conversation about real estate, and I'm looking at you, Jill Ford, is the fourth one like it I've had this week. So ready and available real estate to grow these businesses into, specifically in key sort of commercial corridor areas at critical intersections by neighborhood, is a significant need in the city for tech and non-tech businesses. And the landlords are difficult, and the policies are worse than difficult. And so I think that is an issue that we collectively have to address, and I thank you for bringing it up. Another question I have for the panel is about capital. So a lot of the things you're talking about require a level of capital, right? Growing or scaling a business it takes an investment, and I'm interested to hear thoughts from the panel about the challenges that a lack of capital or lack of the right types of capital may be presenting in our current condition.
So I work with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs through Invest Detroit, through the First Step Fund, and it's always really challenging to, just like with anyone, it's challenging to get them from that point of idea to where we can really take a serious look at them from an investment perspective. First of all, an earlier point I wanted to make was that there's a knowledge gap in terms of resources. There's so many resources available out there, but people just don't know about it. And this is something that really, really bothers me to my core, because, then the conversation turns into, well, those resources aren't available for us. But it's really not true. Sometimes you just have to force your way in the door and have a seat at the table. That's what it takes. And that's something that I'm not seeing enough of, I think, and it's definitely starting to happen, but I want to see more of that, especially from local entrepreneurs, because there are resources out there that are available, but it's just a matter of knowing about them and knowing how to position yourself and speak the language in a way that makes sense to investors, that they can really see your vision beyond just kind of what you're saying at the moment.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is probably about my 4th or 5th business over time. And I've been working on this particular venture for about 4.5 to 5 years. And basically it's bootstrapping. Money I make, money I put back into the business. Earlier this year, I participated in a program that the Lifeline Business Consulting, which is where I met Tiffany, And part of what they do is help prepare you to be able to go in front of investors, be it microloan or whatever. I highly recommend that program. It's being sponsored by the Michigan Women's Foundation. And it provides tools, practice, a community again, that word, to be able to continue to grow and move forward. Because again, the goal is to be a profitable business and gaining those skills necessary to make it happen.
And that's kind of the point I wanted to make too, is there are a lot of businesses that need capital that aren't ready to receive capital, and they need to be taught where they need to be in order to get to that position. And instead of just saying, no, that you can't get a loan right now, you can't get venture capital right now, you can't get impact investing right now. Much like Justine talked about with her students that need to see like what the process is to get like milestones along the way. I think we need to be much better about being transparent about these are the steps you need to take. It's not going to come right now. Over the next couple months, over the next couple years, here are your milestones, and you will get to that point where you are going to be eligible for funding. And that's one thing they do at Lifeline is you're going to walk out, if your credit's not right, because, your personal credit is your business credit, and people sometimes don't know that. Get your credit right, get your business plan right, show your numbers, and we need to teach entrepreneurs that before we can expect them to go out there and get the funding, because in some cases there is funding, and the businesses just aren't ready and aren't eligible for it right now.
I think one of the things, to your point, that we've failed to do is prepare people early and often. I started my career as a banker, and we always told people you need to start a relationship with your banker 3 years before you need your banker. It's true of your impact investor. It's true of your micro-lending funder. It's true of your pre-seed funder. You need to be talking to those folks earlier. And I think those of us in the work have an obligation to make that process clearer and easier. And I'm not sure we're always doing that. We're attempting to, but I'm not sure we're always doing that.
And to be fair, I think it's also a responsibility from the investment side of things also to adjust to what's happening in the community and in the market. So for example, with our First Step Fund, there's an assumption that people, by the time they get to us, entrepreneurs, by the time they get to us, they've had family and friends' money in the company or their own personal investment. Well, what if they don't have that? So that's something that's a minor thing, it might seem like, but if somehow we can be able to provide the equivalent of that family and friends stage of investment, because we just don't see that that's available at this time for that entrepreneur, then that can really propel them along and be very clear about the milestones that we expect for them, and work together to figure out what those milestones are so that they're better positioned to raise more capital in the future. So I think that it's also part of our responsibility as investors to look at the market and adjust accordingly and meet the needs of our local entrepreneurs. Our entrepreneurs in Detroit don't look like entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. So we have to know what the process is that makes sense for our community.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think if Stella's talking about a particular funder, I think unless you're a funder and understand the investments, that most people who have money have gotten money from someone else, right? And it's their job when they're talking to you to be able to they have two sides. One is to make sure that they're able to fund you and to get you the resources you need to do your work, but they also had a contractual obligation or a relationship with the person that gave them money in terms of what the expectation is of that money coming back to them. And traditionally, that tends to be a very narrow focus. A lot of times, very specific financial return expectations, social outcome expectations. So I think there's a combination of both help, I think us as intermediaries in this space really need to help, people that are giving us money understand, hey, I need to have flexibility, more flexibility than I traditionally would have in order to meet the entrepreneurs where they are, which is what Stella was saying. And also, we need to actually have more different, I think as Leslie was alluding to, more different forms of capital to be able to meet entrepreneurs all along the spectrum of where they are. And you think in the traditional investing space, there are, I'm not even sure how many asset classes, called 50 asset classes from, high risk to low risk, multiple different return profiles. And we don't have that in, call it the more like urban space, social space, but you actually need it. And the biggest gap that we certainly see at the moment is at that very early stage, someone that just needs something very quickly, 10,000, 15,000, 25,000 that can get them to a meaningful milestone. and how do we sort of as investors, we have to have a different lens, right? The way that we evaluate that investment has to be very different than the way we evaluate $1 million investment, the amount of time it takes, the criteria that we have. So yeah, I think there is something on the funding community we have to get better at. I'm actually very impressed with the funding community in the last 2 or 3 years. I think everyone acknowledges it. And I think we're all sort of trying to figure out how within the institutions that we work around, how we deal with that. And on the entrepreneur side, is really nice to hear too, is that sometimes the entrepreneurs really do need to get more experience, more training, particularly in the area that they are trying to go into or the sector that they're going into. A lot of times, there's this feeling, if I'm just trying to do good, why wouldn't you fund me? And you really need to have operational experience, not forever, 2 years. And you'll be amazed at the amount of resources that you will find by working for somebody else in the industry that you want to go into. Things will just come to you. And it happened for me. I was going to go do my own nightclub. This is, back in 2002. Best decision I ever made was say, no, I'm going to go work for someone, was a busboy, worked my way up, and everything fell in my lap as a result of, there was connections and everything else that benefited me, but it was by working in that industry that all these things started to fall into my lap. So anyway, I completely agree with what people are saying.
So first of all, I want to thank you for being consistent, because I've heard you give that piece of advice to every entrepreneur I've ever been with you when you're meeting with them. Go work in the industry you want to launch into, and that experience will be valuable for the rest of your career. So I appreciate that about you. I do think it's the best advice I've heard. I also want to sort of challenge us in this question. Are we a community of service providers? Are we a funding community? I think we're starting to see a entrepreneurial community form in sort of some of these spaces and places. But and maybe the answer is yes, I don't know, so this isn't a leading question, but are we getting together in the funding community and talking about the entire life cycle of funding and how we sort of prepare to fill those gaps and orient services around making sure that customers are ready, or potential funded opportunities are ready? Or are we waiting until they get to us to give them sort of redirective advice, and then they sort of start over? And I'm not sure I know the answer, but I'd be interested to hear not only from those of us who do, but those of us for whom we do.
I can start. I think that we are in spirit, a community. And I think that we have to do a better, there is a lot of redirection. So I get a lot of calls, take a call, hear what the entrepreneur wants to do and says, that's not a good fit for us, but here's who I can connect you to. And I think, and then those connections are also fairly, they're not necessarily automated. Like I'll call First Step, or I'll call Ray Waters, the Detroit Development Fund, or whomever else might be a good fit, but it hasn't been, that process could be, given technology and everything else, could actually be a little bit clearer. I think we could be clearer with our definitions in terms of what we fund and use language a little bit better. And I think that we could also strategically, and it is happening. And again, it's like there's multiple different forms of capital. There's kind of the traditional space. We'll call it economic development space. We'll call it like sort of the impact investing social space, which with more foundations and a mix of for-profit and for-impact capital coming in. And so I think certainly knowing MEDC, I know I can see some MEDC folks in here. MEDC mapped out, I know, I've seen the graph, who's at every single stage of a business's growth path, who's funding it at each one of those stages, who's in that space. And that's something that I personally have done internally on the social space, but probably I haven't been as good at sharing that, with the outside community and, strategically as a group saying, okay, how do we fill some of these spaces?
Yeah, I agree I'll echo what Jamie said. I think as a funding community, we probably all know what each fund or organization provides and at what stage we can redirect an entrepreneur to, which company. And that's really helpful for us to know that, but I think it's not really clear to a newcomer, someone who's not familiar with this world. And, they just have an idea and they don't really know where they fit in. So a lot of times it could feel like we're just, pushing them off to the next person. And so I think that's definitely something else that we need to add to our list of responsibilities is learning how to communicate that in a very clear way. But also on the entrepreneur side to do the research and know that, I go to Ray Waters for this. I go to Invest Detroit for this. And that information is out there, and we need to do a better job of summarizing all of that and providing the bigger picture.
So I am overtime. I see Marcus, who I adore, giving me the cut it off, hook. I want to ask one question of the audience. How many of you are self-identified as urban entrepreneurs? All right, so half of you. How many of you knew that all of these people existed in the space to help you? Raise your hands. Less than half of those. So thank you for letting us do this, because now a group of people are aware of some of the folks that exist simply to help them. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about this very important topic. And please hunt us down and challenge us to do better for you in identifying ways to support you and move you to the challenges that face us all. Thank you.
So look, every year, we have several thousand students who are graduating from the University of Michigan. It's close to 10,000 students every single year. And what you